We're in the TechCrunch studio today with Sam Pullara, Managing Director of Sutter Ventures. Sam, welcome to the studio.
Thanks a lot, Semil.
So congrats on your new role at Sutter, leaving Twitter. And you've been an engineer in and around the Valley for a really long time. I think it'd be interesting to just talk through sort of how you started building products and working on computer science problems and sort of how you got from A to B. Like, tell us the whole
thing.
The whole thing.
So I think one of the interesting things is that if you talk to a bunch of people, of a certain age, like myself.
Yes. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. You'll find a lot of the like progenitor stories about how they got into computers are pretty similar. When I was, I think when I was 10 years old, something like 1982 or so, I decided I wanted a computer. My mom, wanted to help me with this. It wasn't like we were super wealthy or anything, but she felt like if I'm really interested in this, and I was really interested in Legos before that, like building things, that she should get me. It would be a good thing. And so the market at the time, they had like the Atari 400, you had the VIC-20, maybe that Apple 1 or 2 was out. The lower end ones were sort of in our price range, and she looks at the Atari 400, she looks at the VIC-20, and she's like, the Atari 400 had one of those membrane keyboards, kind of feels like an Atari 2600. Clearly, it's more targeted at like people who are just going to sit around and play games, right? So instead, she got a VIC-20. It had all of 5K of RAM, of which a K of it was devoted to the screen. And that's really where I got my start in programming. At the time, those computers, when they're turned on, I mean, this might come as a shock to people, but it would come up and it'd be like in BASIC, right? And that environment was what you had to work with, and unless you go out and you start buying other software or getting software some other way, that's I started with print. Hello world, go to 10, 10 print, hello world 20, go to 10, right? And fills the screen with text. And that was, that's the first thing. And it was amazing because like the computers came with the reference manual, they told you all how to do it. And I really, that was really the starting off point.
And so did you continue this kind of work and even formal education in high school, or were all self-taught?
Pretty much all self-taught. So, graduated Commodore 64, Commodore 128, ultimately an Amiga.
Yeah.
And the school part of it, so I was in high school, a reasonably good high school, that had an AP computer science course, but even that was all independent study. The person who was, it wasn't really teaching, and he was proctoring, the computer lab.
You probably could have taught it.
Perhaps, perhaps. I mean, we all, all the 3 or 4 kids that were in that class, all fed off one another and worked together and built
You still
things.
keep in touch with any of them?
Not in that particular group. So starting in around 8th grade, 7th grade, I started getting on bulletin board systems. And so I had met tons and tons of friends back then over that very asynchronous network. And another friend of mine, or a guy that I met at another high school, I didn't actually meet him in person for probably a year and a half after I started talking to him on the phone. And we both spent the summer building programs to talk to bulletin board systems, terminal programs.
And so where was the point where you decided, okay, I'm going to be a computer engineer?
So that's till much later. As it turns out, I'm like, this computer science thing seems way too easy. I'm not going to go to college for this. So I got accepted to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, very small engineering school, and I decided to go in physics. Physics was challenging to me. Computers felt kind of, well, I know all this stuff, right? And I had a big peer group of computer users, and I felt like I was as good or better than most of those guys. So why would I want to go to school for that? It seems like a waste of time. I think things would have been much different if I had been born in Cupertino or Palo Alto and actually seen just how much more sophisticated computer science could be. But I didn't have that exposure, and so went for physics. Even my mom, to your point, my mom was like, why are you going to school for physics instead of computer science? So you seem to love it. Why would you do that? I'm like, well, I can still do that on the side, right? And so went there, did a ton of computer work on the side. through college, graduated, degree in physics, went on to do my master's in physics.
Oh wow! Were you thinking about going academic route?
I was, in high school on the back of my notebook, I have, Sam Pullara, professor of physics, PhD, right?
I mean, calling your shots.
Got into the program at Northwestern with a pretty good scholarship for the master's program. Worked at Fermilab for a summer.
Cool.
Got to my first introduction to Next, because they had some of those there.
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty prevalent in the scientific world.
Yeah.
And then I basically realized I was doing so much work on the side on the computer stuff. I really, I always was just deeply immersed.
So what age did that light bulb go off? How old
So I joined, let's see, I started there when I was 20 in the master's program.
Yeah.
Basically about a year later, I started winding that down and left with my master's.
Okay, got it. And so how did you end up in the Valley?
Yeah, so right after leaving school, I got a job at a consulting shop. My first gig was in Chicago for TransUnion, big credit bureau, and it was essentially moving everything off of mainframes to a giant workstation-based parallel distributed system to process credit records.
Foreshadowing.
It was quite honestly an unbelievably perfect first job in the space, right? I mean, it was a 3-tier architecture, used RPC, used 2 different databases, had a parallel, was using IBM DB2 Parallel Edition on, at the time, AIX. But, and it actually got me into this whole, there's this sort of running theme in a lot of the stuff I've done, which is this transformation, data transformation work.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the first exposure to really large-scale data transformations.
Great.
And digging through all those credit records and converting them into our internal format.
So how long were in Chicago working as a consultant?
So I worked there for about 9 months. Was sort of just continuously done with what I was supposed to do and waiting for the next thing to do.
Because you're PhD Sam Pullara.
Well, no, MS.
I'm just kidding.
But these guys, and I go to the consulting company. I'm like, hey, they're not really using my talents over there. I really would love to have another gig somewhere else that I can really dig into. And they're like, listen, we're paying you X, and we're billing you out at 6X. We have no interest in you leaving there. Just stick around. So I quit. Go to another consulting company who get all of the hey, we'll definitely move you on to the next thing when things get boring. Work at another company for 6 or 7 months. Same thing happens. Okay. They won't move me out. And at that point, I start actually writing what would now be called a blog. At the time, I guess it was called a homepage.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of HTML pages that have my thoughts. And I started reviewing Java IDEs. Getting onto the advanced Java mailing list and talking with other developers. Mm-hmm. This wasn't what I was doing at work. It was just that was what that caught my eye as an interesting place to go. And at some point, I reached out to one of the founders of WebLogic, Paul Ambrose. Mm-hmm. And we were having a discussion about various ways Java could be used in 3-tier architectures. And I said, P.S. looking for a cool Java project, right?
Right.
He passes me off to another one of the founders, Bob Pasker. We talk. I think we talked for over 12 hours on the phone from Chicago to here. And then in November of 1996, they brought me out for an interview to WebLogic. At the time, it was four co-founders, a sales guy, a president they had just hired, and an office administrator, and started work there in early December of '96 as the first server engineer after them.
Got it. And so walk us through just briefly, kind of, you've been around the Valley for a really long time, had a number of interesting roles. What do you think were the kind of inflection points in your career? leading up to recently at Twitter, and then I want to talk separately about move to VC, but
Sure.
talk us through like some of the most formative work challenges you had here.
Well, certainly getting that opportunity to work at a fledgling enterprise startup, coming, this is, now after having been in the Valley for that long, the chances of that happening in reality are quite slim, right? Most founding teams are not necessarily, well, certainly most founding teams are all connected, but even the first employees are typically very well networked with the founders. This was an amazing happenstance that I got that job. So that's sort of the first inflection point that I would say was just incredible. And then probably the next one at WebLogic, besides the acquisition of WebLogic by BEA, which completely changed my life and the life of everybody else who worked at WebLogic. That was a big thing. But working with the office of the CTO at BEA was a big deal. I was helping out on a lot of due diligence for acquisitions, and that kind of introduction to the real business of acquisitions and mergers and things along those lines really gave me sort of a broader view, strategically a broader view of how companies grow and how they think and what their goals are and how I can fold that into like what I was doing as an engineer.
Got it. Okay, so after the acquisition, what are some of the other roles that you held or companies that you founded that you kind of look back on now?
So the next big thing was I was at BEA for probably too long.
Okay.
I ended up left, and I ended up leaving in 2004. I mean, one of the things that was amazing about that environment, though, is that Bob Pasker and the other founders of WebLogic did such an amazing job building the team, and my present company excluded, that we didn't leave. Like even the founders actually left, but the team was extraordinarily cohesive and proud of their work and all this kind of stuff, and really was behind it. And so, I think it was in 2002, Bob Pasker introduced me to Peter Fenton at the time he was at Excel Venture Partners.
Okay.
And that I would say would be like, due diligence, and then the introduction to a very forward-thinking venture capitalist, especially on the open source side. Really got me going around that kind of stuff. So I talked with him like once a month over a year or two. There was a couple of false starts of joining some companies that Excel was backing. And then ultimately he got frustrated with me, offered me the position as an EIR at Excel. And that would instigated my leave of BEA and joining up with him there. That was a huge growth period for me. Got to meet with, I was sort of acting as sort of the front filter for a lot of founders who are coming in and pitching their startups. And it also would help me grow as a interrogator, which is what a lot of these jobs end up being. Whether you're interviewing someone or you're thinking about funding someone, or you're trying to find out like how somebody's system works, whatever it is. You really want to be able to ask the right questions in the right way and get the answers that you need, right? And so that was a case where I'd come into the office down in Palo Alto, and Peter's admin would say, "Hey, there's a group or company upstairs in the conference room. Peter wants you to meet with them." Be like, "Oh, okay, great. Who are they?" It's like, "Don't know." Do they have like a deck or a pitch or something? It's like, "Don't have anything." I'm like, "What does Peter want to know?" He didn't say. And so
perfect.
Perfect. So you'd walk in there and basically have to figure out like, is this a company that we want to do business with? Right?
Got it. Okay. And so you do the EIR and sort of walk us through just until you get to Twitter. What were you doing right before you joined Twitter?
So So there's a bunch of stuff in between there.
Oh,
so
let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
So started a company called Gauntlet Systems.
Okay. What did that do?
Gauntlet Systems, and this was out of the EIR thing.
Yeah.
Founded it with 3 other ex-WebLogic engineers.
Oh, great.
Networking. Right?
Yep.
And we were basically, we had seen how hard it was to develop large-scale software at BEA. And so we wanted to take the stuff we had learned and the tools that we had built there and re-envision them as a software as a service platform for building software. And that, this is 2005, May of 2005. So we go out and I go out with Peter to New York to meet with all the financial companies, since that that was like they were spending 25% of their budget on R&D, and that was that's a great first customer for any enterprise business if you can get them right. And I think all but I think we had 1 out of 6 that said maybe they would put their source code in the cloud at the time, because that's the way we wanted to run it. We had been at WebLogic BEA. We know how the shipping software, just how painful that was. We wanted to run it, as a service. Mm-hmm. And after getting that blowback, we talked to a bunch of other theoretical customers. Did not get, everybody wanted on-prem. The thing worked really nicely. Gave you all the reporting, it was essentially like something deeper than GitHub, but for specific companies, right? And when it was determined, hey, we're going to have to pivot, that we can't go on with the idea that people are going to put their source code and their builds in the cloud. So we're going to have to make this on-prem. Mm. Fortunately, we had thought about this all up front. We had built the software such that you could do it straightforwardly.
Seems like the idea was just a little bit too early.
It was still, my understanding now is that the companies that are trying to get these real enterprises to put their stuff in the cloud now. Still a problem.
Got it.
So at that point, we're like, okay, so we meet with Peter, talk about, okay, well, going to have to hire, more, people more on the sales and marketing side, more, and and all these things that we really didn't really want to do.
Yeah.
Peter gets a call from somebody from Borland at the time, who they were trying to transition out of developer tools and into application lifecycle management. And they call him up, hey, do you have any application lifecycle management companies? And we're like, and he's like, I do. And so introduces us. I spend the next 3 months selling the company to Borland, and we switched to Borland.
Oh,
one of the great things about that product is that aside from one scaling issue that was fixed in a matter of days, we got all of the Borland's developers on the system.
Wow.
In the first month. And this is a product that was, we started development in May, and we're at Borland in January.
Wow.
So that's it's still a product that they sell. 6 months later, there's a theme and a track that you'll see here. It's Bob Pasker introduced to Peter Fenton, then it's Peter Fenton. Peter gets a call from a buddy of his, Bradley Horowitz, who was at the time over at Yahoo.
Yeah.
They were looking for a very unusual role that they hadn't been able to fill. They wanted somebody who, on the one hand, could work with all of their engineering leaders, and on the other hand, could work with the management consultants in the corporate strategy group for this position, VP of Technology Strategy. And so I go. It sounds really interesting to me. I don't have consumer experience yet. I saw a ton of consumer stuff at Excel.
Yeah.
It interests me. I really want to understand it, right? At the time there was really, besides even at the time Google wasn't quite as broad. Yahoo was the broadest possible venue for you to see what's going on in that space.
Right.
Though troubled, obviously. And I interviewed with, I think I interviewed with 16 people, including Jerry and Philo over there. Got that job, and again, it's for whatever reason, if there's two forks, if there's a fork in the road, one says, this is the easy way, and this is the hard way. Basically restart. It's not a reset of my career, but it was let's try this completely different job that's not engineering, right?
Right.
Didn't get away from it the whole time. Did the equivalent of 20%
But you have the credibility
time.
at this point, right, to work with a lot of engineers and manage them.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
That job meandered around for a bit. I started out in corporate strategy, ended up sitting in for, we were launching an application platform, managed that organization for, to make sure that stuff shipped on time with quality.
One random corporate strategy question for you.
Sure.
What is take all the founders out there that are, Series A or B level or below, right? And what is the biggest misconception startup founders have around how corporate strategy group at a tech company thinks?
That's an interesting question. I think maybe the misconception is that a lot of times the strategy group is speaking for the organization directly, when what they're really doing is running sort of a parallel objective process to the rest of the organization.
in computer science language.
Right. TechCrunch got the leaked Facebook, the Facebook strategy / case for buying Facebook that Yahoo laid out. And you can go back and look on that blog post, and the really interesting thing there is all the people that said, Yahoo strategy group is just clueless. There is no way that this company is going to get, grow that fast or be worth that much or make that much money. And I actually think that they typically, if you go back and look at their record and predictions, they did a really great job.
Sure.
But actually moving an actually then knowing the right answer and then convincing an organization of that right answer, I think is really difficult.
Let me just turn that back to make sure I've got it. So you're basically saying a lot of people in the startup community think of a big company X and their corporate development or corporate strategy group as actually being a mouthpiece or sort of running in process with the leadership of the company, when in fact it's actually running kind of its own system.
A lot of times. I mean, they're a consultant role, and they're also trying to be more than just execution for the GMs.
And so, how long were you at Yahoo for?
Yeah, so I ultimately left Yahoo after 3.5 years.
Okay.
Strangely coinciding with a cliff of stock.
Shocking.
And when I left, I was chief technologist of the audience organization, which I got. It was really interesting. The last 6 or 8 months working there, I helped negotiate the Facebook Yahoo deal. I helped negotiate the Twitter Yahoo deal. I did tons and tons of product reviews to try and up the ante. But ultimately, the leadership really wasn't there.
Yeah. Okay. And so, from Yahoo?
From Yahoo, I go to Benchmark as an EIR. Again,
Peter
Fenton.
Yep.
There it was a different kind of ER than at Excel.
Yeah.
It was much more, partner meeting, final decision on company that you looked at along with the rest of the partners. What do you think?
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to the front filter. Didn't spend a ton of time doing that kind of work. Maybe a couple months. Okay. Joined up with some other ex-Yahoos, Luke Wroblewski, who was chief designer, Brian Lampkin, who when he left was head of I think all of the communications products, and started a company called BagCheck.com. Yep. This was a case where, when we were designing the product, we knew we could build the product. We didn't know whether or not people would use it. The product was essentially it's a Pinterest for nerds, if you will.
Pinterest for nerds.
Yeah, it was here's my collection of stuff that I do to do X. So I'm a mountain climber.
Oh, okay.
I'm a software developer. Yeah. Those kinds of things. And it was we were trying to build a very deep platform as opposed to a very lightweight platform.
Got it.
So we built a product where you can very quickly put together a highly organized, detailed collection of stuff that you're using for something, but ultimately it was still too heavyweight to be habitual.
Got it.
So about about a year later, after we had decided, you know what, we're gonna have to pivot again, or we're gonna have to pivot.
Yeah.
I have a conversation with Peter. He suggests I reach out to Mike Abbott over at Twitter.
Yep.
I've always loved Twitter as a company.
Yeah.
I've been on it since early in 2007. I had talked to some of the founders over the years doing due diligence and things like that.
Yeah.
I had done the Twitter deal with started out actually with Ev and Saka and that sort of group. Ultimately, the deal was done with Dick after he had joined, and so I had some history with the company.
Yeah.
And they were in a transformational time where they had started the effort to move from some of their older infrastructure to the JVM.
Which sounds like kind of your first job, right?
In many ways, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's actually a pretty. I mean, I think it's a common thing, sort of globally in computer science, especially for systems that just get too big for their britches. You sometimes need to just start again.
Yeah.
What's great is you sort of have a spec, right? This is how the system works today.
Yeah.
The first day we turn it on, we want it to sort of work exactly the same. We'll go from there.
Got it. So now let's do a hard stop and just talk about the fact that, okay, now you're entering the world of venture capital, and you've sort of been around venture, right? And sort of understand, obviously have a long-term relationship with Peter, and have sort of been around it. How did you make the decision to just sort of let engineering go, right? You've been a hardcore engineer for a long time. How did you make the decision to say, okay, now I want to go do this, and then join Sutter Hill to do that? Because I don't think a lot of people know about Sutter Hill.
Yeah, so Sutter Hill was a really unique opportunity. One, someone I had worked with before, Mike Spicer, who had come into Yahoo through an acquisition. I'd been talking to him for a really long time, and I really respected him as an entrepreneur. And when he was leaving Yahoo to go to Sutter Hill, I asked him, it's like, Mike, you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How in the world are you going to be a venture capitalist? You're always wanting to start something new, and you're always wanting to work on things. And he basically at the time he told me, what, Sutter Hill's different about this. All the partners there are ex-operators. They really dig into the companies that they invest in. Oftentimes, incubating those companies. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see.
Right.
Because I hadn't been exposed to that model.
But there's also different fundamental model, right? That's different about Sutter Hill, right? You have an evergreen fund.
Yeah, almost everything is different.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to talk about those, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so the Sutter Hill model, everyone, being a TechCrunch person, you would have known. Oh, this fund raised their benchmark 6 or Sequoia 10 or whatever it is. And then those funds have sort of a lifespan, usually like 10 years. Yeah. They have a life cycle where you invest differently at sort of the beginning of the fund, towards the end of the fund, because you're trying to make sort of different types of returns. And Sutter Hill doesn't do that. Sutter Hill has an evergreen fund. We have a variety of LPs, and in the whether universities or what have you. Who have sort of bought into the model that they give us money, and we over time give them money back, but we don't have any sort of set period.
Right, and so that can enable you to make investments or incubate them or sort of let them ride without the pressure of time.
Gives us a huge amount of flexibility.
Yeah.
Huge amount of flexibility.
And it seems also too that all your colleagues there are sort of deep technical operators, right? Yeah. And that's the culture over there.
Yes. And one of the neat things too is all the partners invest alongside in deals too, okay. And it really well aligns the whole partnership with helping an entrepreneur succeed. Right. Not just the partner that made the decision to invest in them and maybe on their board, but the connections of the whole firm.
Got it.
And being a firm that's now, I think we just celebrated our 50th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
1962. You know,
Okay.
it has a long history in the Valley.
And so for maybe technical founders out there or potential technical founders out there who, you know, would want to work with you, like, you know, how do you like to be approached? What are you looking for? You know, you said you do incubation as well. What are some things that are on your mind looking out?
Yeah, I
into
mean,
the
so
future?
we have an EIR program,
Okay.
right? So we do a lot of those, and that's usually how the incubation stuff starts, right? You find someone who is a domain expert in something that you think is going to be a big market. You know, certainly one of the sort of the tenets, I would say, of Sutter Hill is that, you know, we're going to invest in great teams and leaders
Yeah.
that are working on, you know, hard defensible technology problems, and they're going after big markets. And, you know, and ultimately we're there for the long term, right? We're looking, you know, we don't have a horizon that we have to, you know, get you to exit by, right?
Great.
And that structure lends itself to, you know, really getting to know people, really, you know, digging in with them. You know, if they need help on, you know, maybe you know, someone needs help on the sales and marketing side, we've got, you know, there are people in the firm that just know that stuff.
Yeah.
Or if they need help on the technical side, you know, honestly, I actually had my second week there. I had an entrepreneur there, and he's going to launch an iPhone game, and he needed help on, you know, how's he going to do a real-time infrastructure for this thing, and I showed him what the architecture should be, and then I wrote him some code for the protocol. You know, I can guarantee you that probably has never happened
So instead of
before.
giving advice, you're an investor that gives code. Awesome.
And in terms of, you know, how to approach me, you know, send me an email. You know,
Cool.
And you know, have a great GitHub account. Always helps.
Awesome.
Always helps.
Well, congrats on all the success in your new role.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming in.